this is the final warning. We don't have awareness of real implications of climate change, how these elements really could play together. We need to move and move fast. So how do we do that? Hi, I'm Markku Wilenius, and I'm going to talk about the past, present and future of climate change. Climate change today is a very hot topic, and very recently came one report by IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that tells again to us that we need to move and move fast. We need to peak our emissions by 2025 and cut half of them by the end of the decade. Obviously, a hugely demanding task, but at the same time, they say from the IPCC, the other researchers, this is the final warning. Now, I have some background on this. I did my PhD, my doctoral thesis, on climate change back in 1997. On those days, it was, yes, an issue, but it was definitely an issue that the decision makers didn't take quite seriously. It was thought to be an issue of the long-term future. That has changed. Now we have the actual situation where weather patterns all around the world is currently already changing. Arctic and Arctic seabelt, the snow and the ice is melting away, and weather patterns have become unstable. Many other symptoms that show that we have messed with our climate system. Now, in order to assess what will happen in the future, we need to have a sneak peek into the past. So, back in 1950s, late 1950s, there was a scientist that was the first one who really started to measure the atmospheric concentration of the carbon dioxide. And he did that in the Mauna Loa, Hawaii. Why there? Because then he thought that, well, there is no local disturbance. So what he's measuring in that mountain of Mauna Loa there is actually saying something about the average of the global climate development. And so over the years he started to notice that the amount of the carbon dioxide is mounting, it's increasing in the atmosphere, and he started to make sense what are the reasons for that. And lo and behold, soon he found out that the real reason was because of the industry, because of the modern mobility systems, all of them using fossil fuels, extracting greenhouse gases, of which carbon dioxide is the most important one. Now, this has been now going on, I would say, for almost like 60 years. So we have a long-term data storage at our hands, a lot of evidence. And in addition to that, we have currently also systems that enable us to simulate quite accurately the existing climate. Of course, we had nothing like that in the early days of the climate change detection. So we have, so to say, the knowledge. What we don't have is awareness. We don't have awareness of real implications of climate change, even if all these compound articles with thousands of scientists putting their stake and their research into this overall reporting on climate change, helping to to mature the best of the art of the day knowledge about that. Still, with all that knowledge, we don't have the awareness. And that awareness is not there because our societies simply have other priorities that they have been kind of preferring. But even the more important reason is that we don't see this as a systemic failure of our society. Because if we would see it as a systemic failure, we would see also very differently what are the probable answers, real solutions to the climate problem. This far, politically, it's been more favorable to talk about the cut of the emissions. And while that is good, and we need to do that, that comes nowhere where we actually should be. You see, carbon is available and present everywhere in the biosphere. And we need to see where are those locations and what needs to be shifted from one location to another. Obviously, the problem currently is it's too much of that stuff is in the atmosphere. Too little of that stuff is in the soil. Too much of that stuff is in the oceans. That's why the oceans are warming. But we need to look at it from the systemic perspective that actually the only real solution to the climate change is that we extract that carbon from atmosphere and put it back on the earth and on the plants. So here we are in Italy, full of beautiful plantation, sea on the background, Rockies, a lot of sky. We have the elements, and we need to understand how these elements really could play together if we want to avoid this calamity of climate change, floods, all kinds of extreme events that would destroy the human societies, cause irreparable losses, I mean big losses, and so forth and so forth. So we need to think this as a system, and the system has, as I said, the parts, the climate, the air in itself, the soil, the forest, the seas. And if we look at it from that systemic perspective, we need to think that, well, the real task is to take that atmospheric carbon dioxide and be able to extract and sequestrate that to the soil and the plants. So how do we do that? Now, all around the world, here in Europe, as well as elsewhere, we have a massive subsidies for the agriculture. These subsidies have been born because agriculture in all parts of the world has really become a matter of survival for most of the farmers. They don't get enough money because also the amount of the inputs that is needed for the modern agriculture is so high that you don't get the amount of the needed money from the market. So that's the subsidizes. And it is a bit kind of a crazy situation because we could use those subsidizes actually to help this very preferable goal of sequestrating carbon to the soil as something that these subsidizes could help to materialize. And there is a study that says that 25% of the modern industrial-based agriculture, if it's changed into more sustainable one, meaning that the tools and the methods, how you deal with the land, enables this carbon and microbes and enzymes to flourish on the topsoil, then after that we would get into the situation where we can actually tie in as much as 250 gigatons of carbon, which is equivalent to 5 years global emissions, and which would bring concretely the level of the greenhouse concentrations of the atmosphere to the sustainable level. So we could do that while we still, of course, need to also to modernize our economies and societies, shift from fossil fuels into the renewables, and change our transportation system in terms of where it gets its energy. And I'm sure that as we move further to this century, this is becoming much more visible for all of us, for the decision makers, that this is indeed the only way how you can deal with the climate change. Because ultimately it is really about how do we deal with the fact that there are still generations and generations to come after us, and if anything, we have this kind of a moral impediment to build at least similar but preferably much better conditions for their living. Currently, we are unfortunately not on that path, so there is another lot of things that we need to be doing. And as I said, it all seems to be that this particular decade, 2020s, is the decade where we need to be making that change. Who are going to make it? I trust very much that it is particularly the small advanced countries who will come first. After that, the bigger countries, which are slower to move, will second that change. But the most important thing is that we really start to act now. And this should happen in spite of what happens with the pandemic, what happens with the Ukrainian war that we are currently testifying to, and so forth and so forth. So many other things that are happening in the world, taking our attention. But for any kind of a serious investigation into the future, we should realize that climate change is the #1 issue for the world. And regardless what else happens in the world, we need to put our focus, our investment, our attention, and really our awareness into that problem and solve it.